All right, so we are going to continue our lesson from yesterday and tie a nice bow on these controlled forms. Yesterday, we covered actually the majority of our objectives. We implemented a controlled form. We bound our input values to the state of that form component. And we wrote a nice generic handle change method or function that allows us to kind of properly handle any changes to each input and modify state directly after each change. So essentially after each key press if we're using a laptop. So let's recap that just a little bit in terms of the structure of our app. I would encourage you, as I mentioned, if we were implementing this in a fully blown app, we'd probably have some routing. So the form would be its own route, perhaps, its own view, or make a toggle that shows and hides the form in some way. In the interest of saving some time, we're skipping that step. So we basically have in our app.js render, we imported our pose form component, and then we're just rendering it right at the top of the page above up our lists, kind of above the rest of the app, but below the header here. So that's where we're going to continue to work today, is in pose form for the most part. And I'd like everyone, if you don't already have your React app running, go ahead and get that going with your npm start command. And once that spins up, we'll take a quick peek at where we ended. Cool. So we've got the app. We've got some, well, actually, I think this is a holdover from it from last time. We'll wait for it to reload just to make sure everything's working. Looks good. We've got our data loaded from the API. We have our yoga poses. And we have our very simple, not very beautiful form. But it's working. And then I believe at the end of last time, if we jump into pose form, we have our handle change. Handle name change I wrote more as to show you that you can write less generic more specific functions. In this case, this method would only be able to handle the change of this name input. And the benefit, of course, when we write a more generic function or handle things more programmatically is that we can reuse this method, follow our dry coding principles, and not have to have a separate method for each input. So ultimately what we end up with, actually, if we go down to the render, here's the bulk of our form. And then below, just to kind of show how this binding works, we created a few elements to just basically, oh boy. That's what I get for changing things on the fly. We basically just bound some text here to match what we input in the form. So we can kind of see in real time, things get updated. This represents exactly what's happening on state. So our next objective is, if we check back here, we need to handle the form submission to modify state, and I'm going to add in, since I did fix the post route on the API, so we can actually work with it. So let's handle form submission, and we'll move this down to, I'm going to actually move, so modifying state will actually be the second thing we do with that. The first thing is to post new pose, or we'll say new data to API, and then we also need to modify state. Now this is right off the bat a difference from the way we've mostly been doing things, right? You mostly just send your data out. Maybe you have a method that refreshes your page or something like that. Now we want to modify state directly after we ensure that the post worked. So that's going to be what we're going to tackle today. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to essentially open it up for any questions on what we did last time, any questions about forms, any questions about this kind of the wiring required to get this feedback loop between state as our values and our onChange method. Really any questions that you have, if you have any. Take a few seconds to think about it. Yeah. I'll zoom out a little bit so if you can still see, we can get the bird's eye view a little bit more. What do you want to see, the render or? Oh, that's okay. That is, That's from a previous breakout, and it's basically, just to explain real quick, so we have a question about like what's going on with isLoaded. Essentially what's going on is if I refresh this page, you'll see it'll say loading briefly, loading right there, and then when the data actually comes back from the API, we see it rendering. So this is what's called conditional rendering, and what we did was we tied this value to state. So really the main thing that we care about on the state of the whole app is this data array. Initially it's empty because we haven't made our fetch request yet, our get request. So in the initial state of the app, this property, this key isLoaded is set to false. And so what this enables is down in the render, created this constant. I'm going to get rid of some of these console logs now. Created this constant that just grabs that value from state and then makes a conditional check. So this is a ternary. You may or may not have seen this kind of syntax before. It's basically the equivalent of an if-else statement. So the condition is the first thing that we're checking. So if isLoaded is true, which when the app first loads it's not. If isLoaded is true, well, condition and then a question mark, and then what you do if the condition's true. So if isLoaded is true, if our data is available, then render our pose list component, pass it the poses as our data on state, etc. Basically, like do the app, but not until the data is loaded. And then we have this colon, and what comes afterwards is what we use in the false condition. So a simple H2 that just says loading. This would be the appropriate place to put something more that gives some more like a better user experience, like a loading bar or a spinner or something like that. But even just something that says loading is better than the user just waiting and wondering and hoping that data is going to come at some point. So that's all that's going on there. That's something we can also cover some more because I personally love how React does conditional rendering. But just to be clear, this is basically the equivalent of like if isLoaded equals true, render pose list, right? Else render pose list, else render this H2 in this particular part of the app. Cool, good question. Any other questions? All right, that's cool. Let's dive in then. So the first thing that we really need to take care of is now that we have everything bound correctly, we know that state is going to be up to date with whatever our latest changes are. And we've seen that in action as we type things out here. They show up down below. And I actually even have it pre-populating with mat to sort of pretend to simulate perhaps there being an existing value in there from a database or something like that. What I'm going to do is I'll take that back to an empty string. And we have these handle change methods, but we need to handle the whole form being ready to submit now. So if we check our objectives, the first thing we need to do, it's kind of a two-step process. We need to post, not new dates, post the new data to the API. So where does the data live? Where does this new data live?
In the form.
In the form, even more specifically, in the form component, and even more specifically on the state. So this dot state of this component is essentially everything we want to submit. And this API is set up to potentially accept more fields, but that doesn't matter for our purposes right now. It could be one field you're submitting. It could be 100. They get handled the same way. So if we need to interface with our API, the hint's kind of right here, but what kind of request do we need to construct now?
Post request.
A post request, yeah. And you guys have all done post requests at this point, I believe. So let's not worry about how this affects the rest of the app just yet. Let's just work within pose form, and let's write a post request together. So what's the first thing I should do here?
Do you need a component did mount for this, since it's in React, or no?
We don't need a component did mount. That usually gets used more for GET requests. Like this component's about to load up and it's relying on some data. Go get the data. Great instinct though. We actually probably don't need a lifecycle hook at all for this. So if we need to just write our own method, how do we start that?
Just potential.
Well, let's wrap it. I tell you what, let's wrap it in a function so that we can potentially do some other stuff in there too. So if we look at our form, we do have a button down here that submits the form. So off the top of my head, there's a couple places where we could attach this method, but let's write it first. So let's just write it here, right within the component, because it's a class component. We need it to be a class component so we can control state. We also need it to be a class component so we can write methods. Now we've done that already with handle change and handle name change, even though we're not using handle name change. So let's just start writing it. What would be a good name for this method, do you think? Post data. Sounds good to me. Equals a fat arrow function. And given that it's a form that's being submitted, and it's so this is in essence this is an event handler. Do we need any parameters for this method?
We just want submit to be a parameter?
Submit. Well, submit is the type of event that would be firing. Can you fit what? Yeah, the event. And can you? And I want you to think about it for like 10 seconds, and then I want to take an answer as to why we do want to capture the event here. Take a good 10 seconds. Think about it. Onder, why do you think we need to capture the event? Well, this is going to be an event listener post data, so we will attach it to either the button or maybe the form itself. But what happens when you submit a form normally in just regular HTML? Do you know? It's okay if you don't. I'll open it up to anyone to answer. It refreshes the page. Yeah, it tries to submit it as part of the URL, like a query string essentially. And then it refreshes the page. Now, we don't want to refresh the page even when we're doing vanilla JS. We certainly don't want to refresh the page when we're doing React. One of the whole points of React is that you basically never have to refresh the whole page. So we need to use a method that's attached to the event to keep that from happening. Prevent default. Yes. So first thing I'm going to do here, event.prevent default. And yes, you can either watch me right now or follow along. Either way, I'll give you some time to work on this for sure. So we want to prevent the default action. That's a good start. Let's see what happens if we don't do that. Description, image URL, submit, boom, the whole page reloads. So we want to take care of that first. And let's go slow here. So there are a couple places that I think we could attach this event now. And we'll do it in a similar way that we have these on changes. Any thoughts on where we could attach this event handler? On the button? I think that would work. Let's try it. Let's try on click maybe. Let's try that. On click equals this dot post data. Cool. Just make a little space there. Let's see what we get there. Cool. I'm gonna just do a hard refresh to absolutely make sure. Nice. Cool. Description, blah blah. Doesn't really even matter if they're filled out. Cool. Looks like it worked. Not getting any errors. Getting a lot of console logs in here. I might let's take a step back and remove some of these console logs because they might get a little confusing. And they were really important when we were, figuring out what's happening in our handle change method. But now that we're kind of more up to speed and on the same page, we'll get rid of those console logs. And nice. So those were firing every time a character was pressed. So that's kind of clogging up our console for sure. And it looks like now this is working. So we hit submit. We've prevented that default action. We can pretty much assume that this is working since the behavior has changed. But I almost always like to verify that in a console log so I know for sure that I'm getting into this method and nothing's happening by accident or by coincidence. So Awesome. We see hello. Beautiful. We're in business. Let me zoom this in a little bit. So we're preventing the default action, and we are going to need to make a fetch request, as Graham said. I want to give you some time to construct that fetch request, and then we'll work on it together. But a post request obviously is different than a get request, and it takes two arguments, right? When we make a get fetch, we can just pass the URL that we want to fetch to. When we make a post, what do we need to add to it? What's that second argument? If you think back to a time that you've made a post request. Or how about this? If we're making a post request, we're not just asking for data, we're what? We're submitting data, we're sending data, yeah. So if we're gonna send data, we need to then let fetch know what that data is, right? So we need that, actually I'll tell you what, everybody pull up MDN docs. If you search MDN fetch post, that might do it. Yeah, this using fetch. I believe our very own Dan Levy wrote this section of the documentations or updated this section of the documentation because there wasn't a great example for a post request. But let's take a look at this. I want to. Is this a good example? This section looks pretty good. Yeah, I'll tell you what. Scroll through the documentation. You don't have to read everything. We'll do 2 minutes to look through the docs, and I want you to think about 3 things that we need to include with this post request. We've already talked about one of them. That's the data itself. So there are at least 2 other things. There are 2 other things off the top of my head that we definitely need in order to do this properly. So 2 minutes on the board. Take a look at the documentation, and we'll chat about it in 2 minutes. Remember, we need 3 things to make this request properly, aside from the URL, obviously the URL. Got about another minute. Oh, really? Well, there she goes. Maybe we'll make, given that we have a lot of like cross cohort mixing now in breakouts, maybe we'll make channels for like each classroom. So if you're in a classroom for a lesson, then you can join that classroom's channel. I think that could be pretty good. All right, another 10, 15 seconds. Looking for at least 1, ideally 3 things that we need to make this post request properly. All right, let's stop that before it beeps on us. Yes, Andre.
First thing we have to declare the method, which is post.
The method. Yes, thank you so much. Beautiful. We need the method. Let's just pseudocode this. Post request requirements. We need the method. Whoops, method. Cannot type right now. Method, and that's going to be post. Sweet. What else? Graham, any thoughts?
The header.
Header. Yes. Headers.
Header.
And there's a specific header that we need in this case. You know which one we definitely need? We can take another look at the docs here. Yep. Yep. You got it, Andre. Content type application JSON. So I'm just going to kind of make note of that here. We'll do content type application JSON. Whoops, that's supposed to be in a comment. Cool. And what's the third thing? We can't do without our body, right? Our data itself. So our body slash data. All right, cool. Where? Oh, that should be commented out as well. Get rid of that. Just going to put this over here since it's just a note. It's not formatted exactly yet. So, excellent. So, let's think about what our data is. Because method post, that's pretty easy. Headers, content type, application JSON. It's just a string, right? Our body or our data, if we look at the docs, we will need to stringify it so that it can be sent over the wires properly. But what is our data? We talked about it a little bit earlier. Yes, the data is an object, and in this case, it's our state object. We've set state up to really be the three things that we need to submit. And state itself, although it seems like this big crazy thing sometimes, is just an object that is available to this component and potentially other, we can potentially pass it down throughout other parts of the app. But the essence of it is state is just an object that lives in this component. So if state is our data, we can probably just capture it in a variable and use that. Let's try that out. So if we do const body maybe equals this dot state, let's see what we get if we log body now. Log body. If we go back to our app, and I'll leave this open. Go back to our app, and we start filling some stuff out. Sweet pose, some image, and we click submit. Wait, is that not where I put it? Oh, I did put it there. What happened? We were getting console logs and stuff a minute ago. Post data. Post data. Huh. I want to do a hard refresh. Let's see if that changes anything. Get rid of this query string here too, actually. Okay, there we go. Don't know why that wasn't working before, but we now have, we have an object, and like this is the essence of what we want to send to our API. So this is another benefit of wiring forms up like this, where the form component itself is controlling its own state, so it's always keeping track of exactly what you want to send to the API, essentially. So kind of makes this part a little less painful. We don't have to pull each value out with like vanilla JS DOM manipulation and all that. So this is where we are now benefiting more and more from wiring up our form correctly in React. Awesome. So, and in fact, we might as well just go ahead and stringify it right here. Stringify this dot state. Now we know that that's working right. Stringify. And make sure you capitalize JSON when you type that out. And let's try this again. We've got a couple things in there. Hit submit and stringy. Man, mine always seems to be like one save behind. Yeah, but you're not supposed to have to hard refresh. It's supposed to hot reload. In any case, now we see that object. It's not as easy to read because it's just been turned into a string. But sweet. We are largely in business now. So what I'd like you to do now, I want to put like 4 or 5 minutes up on the board and see if you now know how to access your body. We know these requirements that we need. see if you can construct this post request, and you can use it's the same endpoint that we're using here. So you can just copy this line from app.js, move this constant right over into the form as well, paste it right above the class, and you can use this. This is the URL that you need to make the post request to. So any questions before I set you loose on this? Okay, cool. You've got the MDN docs for reference. I'll be here to help out if you get stuck. Let's do like a solid 4 or 5 minutes to see if we can get this post request going. Quite. Yes. I will slack to I will slack all the code from PostForm and all the code from app.js to Denver students. Is this from the form? PostForm. PostForm. And I just want to mention, I've been doing a really bad job during this lecture series of putting catches on my promise chains, my fetch requests and stuff. So I would encourage you to do that. We'll definitely do that when we come back together to iron it out. Yes, you can. We'll do 4 minutes for now. If you guys need some more time, that's perfectly cool. Oops. Well, not the way we have it set right now, but you could. I was going to get to that, but you could pass that API URL to the component as part of props. So yeah, if you want to take a crack at that, I highly encourage it. If not, we'll probably touch on that a little bit later.
Yeah, if you would give us the URL. Or we push it right back. Just pull that and use that. Can we keep it as the same URL? Yeah, you can. Yeah, because it's essentially a different story. I do.
But I was even at the library. But I do want to do this project. So, I don't know. Yeah, sounds good. How's it going? Would some more time be beneficial for my reactors? More time to work on it? Okay. I'll tell you what. Let's do another minute to work on it, wrestle with it, and then we'll come together and we'll iron it out. So we're just redeveloping Ashland Madison. This time. With more fake chicks. Bring up. Are we being recorded? You are. So I out you? All right, another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll iron this one out together. All right, cool. That's about time. Does anyone have a solution or part of a solution, something that we could start working on together? Can you slack it to? Yeah, sure. Whatever you have, whatever you have. You just slack it to Denver students, or you can slack it directly to me. Awesome. So I'm gonna grab grab this part. Cool. Thank you, Fiona. So I'll leave our notes here. Get rid of that. So now we need to fetch. I don't think we need this return statement just yet. I don't know if we will need a return statement actually, but we definitely need to fetch. So we're fetching to the API URL. Actually, Fiona, can you walk me through it? What you have? The fetch part. Yeah. Right, which we have up here. Yep. That we made up here. Yep. Yeah. Nice. Looks good. Looks real good to me. I want to point out that this is all the second argument to the fetch. So it's an object. Yep. It's sometimes called an options object or an options hash. I think they refer to it kind of like that in the documentation. Yeah. In any case, sometimes I actually, to make sure that it's really clear what I'm doing, will even pull this out and store it in a variable. So something like, let's get our spacing right, const options is what I usually call it, equals this object. This is a stylistic choice. It is not the right way to do it necessarily. Whoops. I need this part as well. So sometimes Whoops, what have I done wrong here? Headers. Oh, here we go. And then close the whole object off. So sometimes I'll just make a separate variable that has the options after having made a variable that has the body, and then my fetch, I just pump options right in like that. That is, again, totally stylistic, totally up to you. Since I just pulled it out, I'm just going to leave it like that. So that, I think, in a lot of ways is the bulk of what we need to do. So we're going to send out this fetch request. We're going to send some data, and we need to handle the response, right? So we'll have a dot then response. And what's the next thing we need to do with the response? What's that intermediate step that we almost always have to do with response.json? Return response.json. So we're going to write that as a fat arrow. Response.json invoked. So it's a fat arrow function on a single line. So it's, what's this called here? We're returning, but it's a special kind of return. It starts with an I. Implicit return. When you see a fat arrow function that is on one line like this, this is the equivalent of returning response.json. And that's really important in the context of a fetch request or any promise chain, because what we return in one section of the chain is what gets passed to the next section. So this is what enables then, I'm going to call this posted. So a response comes back, we return that into JSON. I can tell you because I wrote this API. This API is set up to return you the whole object that you posted to the database, the whole resource, including its ID. So then when we have posted available, I'm going to open up a function block with curlies rather than do the one line implicit return. I'm just going to log posted for right now. Cool. I think that looks pretty good. Let's give it a shot, see how it goes. Whoops. I'll move this back over here. So, got our app. I'm going to do a hard refresh just to make sure we're up to date. Name. Let's do something really generic like yoga pose, this pose. Oops. Man, I'm having trouble typing today. This pose is just the best. Image URL. I actually have an image that I found. If you're playing around with this on your own, I'll Slack out this image if you want to play with it. Actually, you know what? Find an image of your own, honestly, because since we're all using the same API, we can all post to it, and we'll all receive those in our actual app. So I'll do this one. You just search for any image. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be an actual like yoga image. And let's see what we get now. Post form. Hey, it worked. Awesome. So I'm going to zoom this in a little bit. So this is what came back. Pose form JS line 36. 36, that's exactly the line that we just implemented with the console log. And we now have an entry in the database. So it has an ID that our backend assigned to it. It has the image URL, the name, and the description that we input. I mentioned earlier that there are a bunch of other fields that this API can take but doesn't have to. So we left those off because we don't need to be posting all those things. But it would just be a matter of having more inputs if you needed to post that stuff also. And it worked. We did it. We did it. But one problem. We scroll down to the bottom of our list. Oh, you actually kind of do see something. Is that what I called the pose? No, I don't know where that came from. That might be maybe that might be from something that you guys were trying to post just now, actually. But yeah, cool, sweet. So, but we don't see the one that I just made, and we want to, of course. Now, if we do a hard refresh, that data is persistent now. It's in the database. It's in the backend, and boom, we do get our resource. We do get our yoga pose in here. But that's not the like super slick functionality that we want, right? So, two questions. Why does it not update right away? Why do we have to do a hard refresh before it updates? And the second question, what can we do about that? So I want you to think about that for a good 10, 15 seconds. Really just the first part. Like why did our data not update? And take a look at the code. Good 15 seconds to think about it. And I want to get your thoughts. All right. Who has an idea about why we didn't get that super slick front-end framework, automatic, it's there functionality? Any thoughts? Yeah. Right. We didn't tell it to go onto the page. So we made it persistent. We sent it to the API. So that makes it so that when our whole application requests the latest data, then it gets it. But we haven't changed the state of the application at all. So we don't get the new data. Like that's just kind of how it works. So the next step, of course, is what do we do about it? And I think there's a few ways that you can approach this. First of all, not every form needs to be updating some other part of the application all the time. So like this is a perfectly legitimate approach for a form that is not requiring the exact functionality that we're looking for. And like if we were using routing and we were on a different route, on submission, it would probably send us back to the main route, and then it would do its component did mount and kind of take care of some of that for us. But you may find yourself in a situation where you do want to update the state of the application when something gets posted immediately. So that's kind of the situation that we're in right now. And the issue is that our app level state, our whole application state, which is where our data lives, right? That state isn't getting updated. We're using the state of the form to post to the database, but as Derek was saying, right now we're just logging posted when it comes back. Ideally, what we could do is set the state a layer higher once that data comes back. So there's a few ways you could handle this. You could pull this whole post data method up to the app.js, app level state, and pass the method down through props so that it can change state up there. Did you have a question or a thought, Andre?
For that, so if we only console on it, how did you make it appear on the page?
So I did a hard refresh of the whole app. So, and the reason why that works is when you refresh the whole app, our component did mount function fires on app.js, and this is what's asking for all the data and setting the state of the app. So this method isn't getting called when the submission happens. So this is what gets the latest data. So one way we could try to handle it. The place that you would want to handle it is inside this .then. So really good instincts on that. Like update, let's just do a little pseudocode. Update state of application to reflect successful post. Because like we also don't want to update the state too soon. We don't want to update it necessarily as soon as it's submitted because we want to make sure that it got into the database right. Because you could have errors in that process. It could be a bad request. The server could be down for some reason. So if you're updating your client side state too early, then you might give your users a false experience. They're like, oh wait, it was right there. Wait, why is it gone now when I refresh? Because it didn't get data persistence in the database. So I think that like there's a few ways you could handle this. We could refactor the whole thing and pull it up. But I think a better way to handle it, for right now at least, would be to write sort of like a helper function up on app level state that makes a request for the latest stuff. And then we can just fire that method down here in our .then. Does that logic follow? So if we need to update the state of app.js, we need to update this data array. We can't do that from inside a pose form because pose form is down a level in the hierarchy. Pose form gets rendered by app. So app is up here, it's the top of the application. Pose form is doing its thing, it's controlled, it's making its submissions, it's firing the on submit or the post data method. And then the request succeeds, and we have a .then where we're waiting to do something down here, but we can't change state up in app.js from down here. We can only change it with a method that's attached to app.js. So we could write a helper method that fetches new data and pass that method down to our form and then use it in our form to update state up in app. Let's just see it in action. So pose form, and this is also like a different way that I was planning on showing you. I was gonna pull the whole method up, but I think that this might be better. Let's try it out. Let's just write a method called update data equals a fat arrow function so that it's bound to app.js. This is what lets us call set state and modify app level state. And we basically just wanna almost do this exact fetch request, right? So I'm going to pull that out, paste it in here, get rid of the console log. We don't need that. So this is basically just making a fetch request to the API, receiving the response, and then setting state to be like the most up-to-date data, the most up-to-date poses. So let's just see what happens if we use it just like this. So first step, we now have a method that's bound to app.js. How do we give it to pose form? How can we pass it? If we look at our render method here, we're doing something similar for our pose list and kind of for header also.
Sorry, what was the question?
So the question is, how do we wrote this method just now, this update data method. How do we give it to our form component so that the form could use it? Yeah, we'll pass it as a property. So we'll pass it as props. And props is just shorthand for properties. So we can do update data equals our curlies this dot update data, since it's a method that's attached to this class. Cool. Any questions about that piece? Because this is really, really key in terms of like you can pass data all through a front-end framework application, and you can pass methods all through the application too. And we need this method attached to app.js so that when we call this.setState, it's setting this particular state. So if we need to change app.js state, we need a method written on app.js that can change it. So let's try it out. We should be able to receive it now down in pose form. So it's going to come in as part of props. Actually, let me just make sure that I wrote that correctly. Yep, this.update data. Looks good. So now we should have access to this method through props. So here's where we want to update the application. So I think we can just do this dot props dot update data. So once we've verified that this post worked correctly, update the state of the application. So let's try it. No, because this function and there are ways that we could do it where we just pass that new object back up and just set it on state directly rather than make another request to the API. And actually that's more performant because you're not making multiple requests. It's faster, it's slicker, but it requires a little more legwork than just writing this method. So I mean, first of all, let's see if this works. But since we're not, we don't need to pass it anything because it's taking care of getting the data right here up in app.js. So let's try it. Do our hard refresh. Got a bunch of Johns in here. And let's just grab like a random image of yoga. Sure, this one looks cool. Or this one maybe. Oh my god, that one's too big. Open this image so we can get just its URL. There we go. And let's post that in our form. New pose, just new pose, best pose, image URL. Submit. Boom, there it is. So, again, there are multiple ways to approach this last piece. And the way I usually try to do it actually is once I've verified that the post has succeeded, this is sort of like the quick and dirty and easy way, I would say, is just to fetch the data again. What makes for the best user experience and the fastest response time is now that you have this posted object, this new resource that's ready to be added to the app, you could write a method that passes this object back up, pushes it into the data array, and then sets state with a new data array. Does that logic make sense? This part is pretty complicated. Like front-end frameworks are awesome, but this part is kind of complicated because you need to do two things. You need to update the back end in the database, and you need to update the front end. So if we were to implement this using the approach that I just mentioned, we could probably, you know what, let's just try to do it real quick. Would that be worthwhile? Okay, let's try it. So I'm thinking we can, and I'm just gonna bang this one out, so just watch and follow. We only have like 5 minutes left. So what should we call this? Add new pose. I probably would call it update data or something like that, but we already have a method that's doing that. So add new pose will receive the pose for sure. Yeah, actually, this might not be that bad. First of all, let's just make sure that we can wire it up to receive the pose. So I just want it to capture the pose. We'll try and pass that back up, and we'll log the pose. So we'll try this out. We need to pass it to pose form. So we'll do add. Actually, I'm just going to rename it add pose because that's easier to type. Equals curlies this.add pose. Excuse me. Let's change its name. Add pose. Now that method is available down here as part of props. And here we go. We'll comment this out for right now. And let's try to use this method. So this.props.addPose, call it and pass it posted, right? Because this is the new pose that was just created. Let's see if this works. Let's see if we can get it. We'll clear this out. I'm just going to post some text. I don't care about the image right now. Well, actually, let's make it really clear. Test, test, test. Submit. Pose form 36. I'm not sure that this is happening. I'm not seeing a console log in. I'm not seeing a console log here, right? From line 59. No. All right, let's try a different approach here. I think what we need to do is work with the binding. So this.props.addPose.bind. And we don't want to change where it's actually bound, so I just pass null. If this doesn't make sense right now, I covered this in one of the previous videos, and we can very much cover it again. For right now, I'm just going to try and blast through it. But in essence, this should allow us to pass up a resource. Let's try that. Figure this out. Submit. Does not seem to be working. Not getting anything, huh? Tell you what, let's just log hello or something like that. Add pose. Let's just try and fire it and get a console log. I'm getting nothing here. Well, why? Add pose equals this dot add pose, add pose. Update data certainly worked. I'll tell you what, let's log props up here. Let's see if that method is getting down. Update data function, add pose function. What's the problem then? There it is. Oh, didn't hard refresh, of course. All right, now we should be able to add pose, pass posted in, do a hard refresh to make sure. And let's see. The database is going to be filled with some garbage after this, but that's okay. App.js line 60, I think we did it now. Yes, we logged the pose properly now. And we see this is what's actually come back from the database. So, awesome. Now that we have it, we'll wrap this up in like the next minute. Now that we have it, all we really need to do instead of logging it is set state. So we can call this dot set state. We'll take an object, and well, actually, what we need to do first is make a variable. We can do I'll do let new data equal this dot state dot data. So like I know I'm calling it new data, but it's because it's going to be new data. So right now I'm just setting it to be what's currently on state, and then we can do new data dot push because it's an array, and we can push in the new pose. So now new data is the actual new data, and then we can call this dot set state data, set it to new data, and I think we're going to be in business here. So find one other image so we can verify. Let's try this one. All right, let's try it. So I'll close this down. Let's see. We're going to have a lot of stuff down there, but we've got plenty of room to see if this works. It doesn't really matter what it's called. We'll paste in that image. Submit. Oh, I don't know if it worked. Why? Let's see if we hard refresh if we get it. There it is. I wonder why that didn't work. Tell you what, let's log new data. Try and ensure that it got in there. Let's try this one more time. Name best pose ever. It's definitely getting in there. Ooh, why? Oh, 33 is an array of 1. Oh, it may be that when it comes back from the database, it's actually in an array. I think that might be the issue that we're having here. And so it's not sure how to iterate through it properly. But when we do the hard refresh, we do get it. Yeah, I think that's the issue. We're running out of time. Actually, pose and index 0. Last try, and then we're done. Here's my pose. We don't need a description. Image URL, submit. Boom. There we go. We did it. All right, sweet. So that's a couple different ways you can handle it. The quick and dirty is just to fire off another GET request like this. Honestly, the more performant and once you get it right, actually kind of less code way to do it is to write this. Again, other ways you could handle it too, but one way is to write a little helper function that you pass down to the form, and once your resource comes back from being successfully posted, you can set it. You can pass it back up to app.js and set it on state. Cool. We covered a lot. We can cover more. If you have some questions, let's get to that stuff maybe tomorrow or next week. I know, especially at the end, I threw a lot at you, but I do want to wrap for now. But we covered handling form submission. We posted our new data to the API, and when that data came back, we went through a couple different ways to modify the state of our app so we get that really slick UI. Question? Yes. I will. I've got the other one uploading, and I'll try and get both of these uploaded by the end of the day. Yep. Along with the code to go with it. Sweet. Thank you so much.